Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Transportation Committee meeting of January 24, 2018. Belated Happy New Year to everyone. I'm Mike Bond in the chair, joined by Nuri Martinez, the vice chair. I don't believe Mr. Koretz will be here, so it'll be just the two of us today. Let's get right down to business. We have a new public speaker card system today. So we are going to take people who have multiple comment cards first. So Mr. Herman, you have 2 minutes for all of your cards and 1 minute for general public comment. Do 2 and 1. Thanks, Adam. Just a reminder,
good afternoon and Happy New Year, everyone here.
Mr. Herman,
you are.
I said.
You're running my time, though.
You hold the time for a second. Just a reminder, these 2 minutes are for items that are actually on the agenda. You can begin.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, you know that pedestrians in the state of mobility are discriminated by the city of Los Angeles. And why do I say that? Because the ADA Section 203 28 CFR prohibits discrimination.
What item are you referring to?
The one on mobility, sir.
Which item?
The one on Department State of Mobility for pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles because of these road diets that impact and adversely interfere with...
item number are you referring to, Mr.?
Fucking number 1, bro.
The general manager's comments.
Whatever.
Thank you.
So you see, the Brown Act violation is part of my complaint. Then you go into item 2, the racist Wesson dealing with Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. Well, leave the niggers alone. You don't do shit for them anyways. That's why there's so many homeless living on our streets today. Then we go into item number 3, 4, and 5 regarding oversized vehicles. Well, as long as there are restrictions, how do you expect niggers to park when they need to rest? Can't rest if there's no nigger parking for niggers like me.
Hold this time for a second.
And then,
hold time for a second. Hold your time. I want to apologize to the people in the room who have not been here before. Because of the First Amendment and several court decisions, we have to allow Mr. Herman to engage in his hateful dialogue, and there's nothing we can do about it. It is, I hope abundantly clear that it does not reflect the sentiment of this committee or this council or any of the elected officials in the city, but I heard there's some new faces here who might not understand what the hell is going on, so I just wanted to clarify that. You may continue, Mr. Herman.
Well, rudely interrupted during my only 2 minutes of public comment on First Amendment and the Brown Act, 54950 to 54963, in addition to item 6, Bonin established oversized vehicle restriction streets for certain streets. Well, fuck you. The public is not asking for restrictions. We're asking for accommodations. You're taking away parking from the disabled. You're asking for fees against the disabled. And the disabled are the population of fucking people with the smallest, lowest, valuable income in the state of California. Fuck Sacramento on that. And then on item 7, in CD 1 and 13, Board of Public Work reports, fuck them too. Now my general public comment.
You have 1 minute for general public comment, and it needs to deal with matters pertaining to the jurisdiction of this committee.
On item 5 today, old business, dealing with so-called Willits versus Los Angeles.
That's not a matter in this committee.
It deals with transportation. No. When you're providing public access for sidewalks, path of travel, sidewalk use, it's all a part of transportation. So when you declare a negative against my public speech, you're only clarifying that I'm right and it's a fact. ADA prohibits discrimination based on one's disability and one's non-visible disability. So stop the hatred against the disabled. Gentleman Daniel, who's a disabled man, who was speaking kind of funny and very hard to comprehend, he's right. If you don't like what the gentleman is saying on his behalf, I can clearly put it for you. Fuck you white motherfuckers for fucking up my small city, fucking up my quality of life and Bain Act and my constitutional right. Fuck you, Bonin.
Okay, I'm asking Mr. Spindler to be escorted from the room for making the goat sounds. And Mr. Herman, you have your only warning.
What? You didn't give me a warning before.
I want Mr. Spindler out of the room.
What? You didn't give me a warning before. Mr. Spindler, there was no warning. No warning.
You're disrupting the meeting.
There was no warning issue.
You're disrupting the meeting right now.
There's no warning issue, man. There's no warning issue, faggot. Don't be a faggot. There's no warning issue, faggot. You got to give a warning first, faggot, before you eject somebody, faggot. Did you know that, faggot? Did you know that's a state law, faggot? Huh, faggot? And I signed up for the fucking items, faggot. Made that violation, faggot.
Mr. Herman, out.
For what?
You just disrupted the meeting.
The public speaker engaged.
Mr. Herman,
What?
goodbye.
For what? You don't even give me a warning. That's how much of a racist you are. You deal with a population of homeless people out there in Venice Beach the same way you treat me.
Eric,
White
could you
nigger with
get the
a
sergeant
fat
at
ass.
arms and have him escort Mr. Herman out of the room?
Give me a warning. You so unreasonable, unpractical, and inconsiderate without giving anyone warning, and this is the way you deal with the public. You deal with the public like this because you're racist. You're white, you're gay.
Mr. Herman.
And your so-called fucking little world.
Mr. Herman.
God hates homosexuality, and so do I. So do I.
This meeting is in temporary recess. Open the meeting. And again, on behalf of this committee, apologies to the audience for the spectacle you've had to endure. We'll continue with multiple speaker cards. Is there Mr. Schumer or Ms. Schumer? I assume that was Mr. Spindler. Is there a Mr. or Ms. Kirk? I assume that was also Mr. Spindler. Okay, that concludes general public comment, and we will go to our regular agenda. And we will first recommend for approval on the consent calendar items 2 through 8. Without objection, those items are approved. That will bring us to item number 1, which is the general manager's report.
Good afternoon, Councilmember Bonin, Councilmember Martinez.
You got a tough act to follow.
First and foremost, let me endeavor to raise the general level of dialogue here by celebrating and recognizing some of the very finest public servants and the best things about public service that I get to do, which is to celebrate the amazing team that I get to be a part of at LADOT. So we're going to acknowledge today 2 exceptional employees, and when I say your name, please stand. First, Tamor Tanavali, Transportation Engineering Associate 3 from Project Delivery and Operations. Sorry, yes. You got a lot of fans, Tamor.
That may be a record for one of your presentations. And I should note that there are representatives not just of your department,
Yes.
but of building and safety here.
Building and safety in the house. Thank you for coming, guys. It means a lot. Tamor is often the first person from LADOT that many people see when seeking feedback on a proposed land use development, on a challenging site plan, or just trying to better understand the city's development review processes. When the Multi-Departmental Development Services Center at Figueroa Plaza began operation in early 2016, Tamor easily assumed the leadership role for this service as LADOT's first case manager and has successfully assisted thousands of property owners and architects maneuver through the various layers of permit reviews and approvals. Last year, he worked closely with the Mayor's Office and the Department of Building and Safety to establish and implement all 20 of the development reform strategies identified in a partnership plan aimed at streamlining our review services and enhancing our customer service culture. Tamor consistently delivers exceptional customer service, and we at LADOT are fortunate to count with his leadership, guidance, and responsiveness. Thank you, Tamor. Next up, we have Jacqueline Garcia, Management Analyst with Administration and Field Services.
That may have just edged out Tamor.
Well, admin and field services does not play around. When they represent, they represent. Jackie is a newly promoted management analyst in the Budget and Administration Division. She started working for LADOT as an administrative examiner in 2014 and then as a transportation engineering aide in our active transportation division in 2015 to 2016. She left LADOT for a short while to work at the Department of Building and Safety as a management assistant, but found her way back home to LADOT just a little over a year ago. Since coming back to LADOT, Jackie has brought her friendly, helpful attitude, dedication to high quality of work, and a commitment to follow through to the Budget and Admin Division, earning her a recent promotion. Jackie has revamped the way LADOT tracks and delivers facility projects for over 30 of LADOT's field offices throughout the city, as well as the way we purchase commodities, making it efficient and easier for our internal customers. She oversees our work order system, ensuring that the right funds are programmed for the right project. She provides technical assistance on budget requests and is working directly with our executive team and planning committee for the upcoming NACDO conference in Los Angeles. Jackie is in the last phase of earning her master's of urban and regional planning and transportation planning from California Polytechnic University, Pomona. She definitely is a rising star in LADOT. Please join me in congratulating them for their outstanding performance and commitment. And with that, I'm happy to answer any other questions from the committee.
Do you have any questions or comments?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for continuing to acknowledge the amazing employees in LADOT. Yeah. Okay, that will bring us to item number 9.
Item number 9 is the DOT report relative to medical transportation regulation.
And before you start, you can take a seat. Before you start, Matt Armstrong, is there Matt Armstrong here? Yeah, please come on up and do your public comment. Go ahead, sir.
Go first?
Yeah.
Hi, well, thank you. My name is Matt Armstrong. I'm the president of the Los Angeles County Ambulance Association, representing 18 providers that do business here in the city, so that's about several hundred ambulance permits. First, I'd like to thank Mitch Englander for making the motion back in early 17 to help us get this ball rolling. So I came here in support to give my support to the LADOT with the recommended changes. Our industry believes that these changes will be a great help for the burdensome and duplicative processes that are already in place. But lastly, I wanted to give Mr. Jarvis Murray a big thank you from the ambulance representatives that really appreciate the ability to come into his office, have a very long discussion about our battles, and we've got a good working relationship now that we really appreciate. So I want to thank Jarvis. And
Thank you
that's
very
all.
much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, council members Bon and Martinez. My name is Jarvis Murray. I'm the taxi cab and franchise administrator for the LADOT. And this report comes to you. We were asked to take a review of our permitting processes related to our medical transportation. Our department oversees pretty much all for-hire vehicles here in the city, which includes many of our medical transportation providers, as well as the ambulance companies. And taking a look at our regulations and our permitting processes, we discovered, and as you may have read in the report, that there's dual regulation of the industry. The industry is regulated by the county, as well as by the City of Los Angeles. The county primarily focuses on the administrative pieces of the regulation, and we have the ability to arrest and work on the criminal pieces of the regulation. Some of the processes, while there are many benefits to the dual regulation, because we've been able to combine our resources, not just with the county, but with other counties, because many of our ambulance companies work with Orange County, work in San Diego County, and some of the other counties nearby. But we've also been able to combine the resources and work with them to, weed out some of our lesser actors. But as part of that, there's also been an overlap in our authorities. And so as part of that, part of the report, the main items in the report are two main things. One being, and the largest one is related to the background checks. Currently, ambulance drivers and attendants are fingerprinted on multiple levels. They're fingerprinted typically by the DMV if you want to become an ambulance driver, and they're also fingerprinted by the county. In order to become an ambulance driver in the city of LA, you must have an EMT certificate. The only place you can get that is through the EMS division of the county. And as part of that EMT certificate, you are fingerprinted by the county. Currently, there's a final layer when they begin to work in the city of Los Angeles, which is where the majority of their business is, where they're fingerprinted by our department as well. And that's onerous for many of the drivers. They're basically paying for 3 sets of fingerprints to come through in order to begin their jobs, to begin working. And so after discussing this with the county, as well as working with the ambulance industry, we're working on processes so that the county can notify us related to any issues for an EMT permit certificate. And so because of that, we are recommending that the DOT no longer require fingerprinting of ambulance drivers and attendants for the private ambulance companies for those that are licensed through LA County EMS already. In general, we rarely have an issue where we have a driver that we've had to deny, because chances are after you've gone through the EMS portion and you've seen us, you've already been vetted through the county. And as a matter of fact, we recently had an issue where we had denied a driver, but he had already been through the county processes. He had some issues in his background. The county had actually already reviewed them, and he had brought paperwork related to the county's review of his issue, which went a long way into determining why that shouldn't be an issue. And so we're working with the county on those types of processes to ensure that they don't have to take that extra step and spend that extra money in order to obtain a driver permit from us. The second layer of that, in order to help the ambulance industry as well, relates to the addition of their vehicles. Currently, we have a public convenience and necessity requirement to add any additional vehicles for hire vehicle population. What that means is that any ambulance company comes in and says, we just bought a brand new ambulance, we have a new contract with a hospital, and we need to have that one new ambulance operate for that hospital. We have to go through an entire commission process in order to get their approval. And as you well know, commissions are once a month. So if someone comes in and says, we're signing a new contract, our new ambulance just became outfitted, can you come down and take an inspection of it on the 4th? You're already too late for the next commission meeting. Your ambulance will not go into service for another 6 weeks at the earliest. And so we're trying to eliminate those processes as well, because we can still do the check. There is a requirement, a financial requirement related to the vehicles. We do all of those things, and then we can approve. Currently, we do an approval and then bring it in front of the commission with a recommendation of our approval, to which they would approve as well. But that could be, depending on when you get your vehicle in, a 6-week process or a 3-week process. Just depends on when you get your vehicle in, instead of something that you can begin working right away. So those are the main items that we are looking to make some changes to, and that's the main items that are part of this report. This isn't a one-time thing for us. I've been here about a year, and as I'm working with the ambulance industry, we are trying to work through a lot of our processes as well as the regulations to help determine what can and can't be streamlined. So this isn't going to be the only time that we're going to make any changes. We're going to be looking at, things such as how to adjust rates, what should the rate methodology be, We're looking at, inspections and how those are done and how those can be done better. And, also just newer technology and newer regulations that they're working on. So there's going to be a long process, but we expect to have a better system in the coming years.
You have any questions, Ms. Martinez?
I just have two questions. So if this responsibility is taken for the Transportation Commission, what would be left for them to do?
The appeals. We still have company appeals. We still bring in new companies. We also have drivers that could be denied as well. And also, this is...
Do you think we need a commission?
I think it's helpful because this is only the ambulance side. So our ambulance companies are one group. We have an other side of medical transportation that this does not affect. And we have roughly 35, maybe a little bit less because there's been some consolidation in terms of ambulance companies. We might be down to 27.
We heard the Fuse report in Public Works, Mr. Chair, and I know we're going to hear it in this committee as well. So it calls for a series of consolidations and elimination of certain commissions, and that's why I don't know if that's the direction or the will of the council. I don't know that yet, but it's very interesting. The other question I had is, what is the current estimate time that it takes to actually process an application, and how much time will be reduced if we adopt this new process?
Well, for the driver permitting side, when this began, it was actually a very long process. We've moved that process.
How long? Say I want to drive an ambulance.
Yeah.
How long would it take?
Right now, it probably takes, about a week or two currently. But again, when this started, it was taking 60 to 90 days. Okay. So we've done a lot to bring it down. So it was a very big issue when we began. We've eliminated some of our processes. We've cleaned up some things, and so we've been able to make it streamline it.
So we went from an average of 60 to 90 days to now an average of about a week?
About 10 days, maybe 10 to 2 weeks, 10 days to 2 weeks. And now what this will do is reduce the cost to the new drivers who are beginning to begin to work. And it does eliminate one step because at that point, they'd have to come in and they'd have to get an appointment for fingerprinting. Not just turning in application paperwork, but an appointment to also do your fingerprinting. This eliminates that piece. This is now more of if all your paperwork's together and we have the EMT certificates, we can begin issuing your permit right away. So there's no wait for you to come back and do fingerprinting.
And the commission's role would be
well, they don't have a role in that process. The only role they have in the driver permitting process is appeals. Right. And that's if we deny a driver.
That is actually a very big part of the appeals, the enforcement part of it, because the county is not willing to do that. They don't have the capability. They don't have the capability of enforcing the city of Los Angeles, and it has been a big issue for us. We do get a number of appeals that come in on some very serious violations.
Just a couple questions. We're keeping the redundancy intentionally with the vehicle inspections.
That's correct.
And why are we doing that? What are some of the violations that we found, and why is that redundancy helpful and useful?
Well, it's two things. One, the county's primary goal in inspection is to look for the medical equipment. So they have nurses on staff, and they work towards, does the oxygen work? Does the life-saving equipment work? And they're focused on those things. And then the training of the EMTs themselves. Do you know how to actually use this equipment? The LADOT's focus is primarily mechanical. So we're looking at, the tires, the safety equipment. Do your blinkers work? Is your tire tread okay? And we do an equipment check, but we're going to look at streamlining that equipment check. And when I say equipment, I mean medical equipment check. Because the county does do that. We're going to basically get a checklist from the county. Hey, here are the things that we would like to make sure they have in there. We can't check to make sure that they know how to use it because that's really more of a nurse function. Sure. But we can make sure that you have the right type of equipment. And as long as they do that, that's fine. But we do have a redundancy because, and I've seen this a lot, particularly on the taxi side of the world, where a vehicle can come in one day, and then to cut costs, the company moves tires around on different vehicles, sure. And then you come back in, or you see that vehicle on the street 3 days later, and you look and go, wait a minute, we just inspected that vehicle. How does it look like this? And this happens as well in ambulance.
Right.
In the ambulance industry, we have some really great providers.
Right.
And this is true in all of the industries.
But they
We
can
have some-
still
we have some
do that,
providers-
just they have to wait 2 more weeks before they can do it now.
That's a lot of energy.
Well, no, it's
Changing out tires. I mean, that's
it's
a lot of-
you want to cut costs. You'd be amazed what you're willing to do. But what it is with the dual regulations is that there's so many eyes, or a lot more eyes on the road, that can do something about a lot of those things. And so, even currently we have an issue with a company that's operating improperly in another county. They would like to become operating in our county.
Yeah.
And the other county contacted us about it. We contacted some of the other counties. We contacted Medicare. And so we were all on the same page in terms of, here's my information. What information do you have about them? Because they've told each of us different things about who they are.
Right. And does this impact ambulances that only pick up and drop off in Los Angeles? Or if someone is going from Santa Monica to Culver City for whatever reason and is passing through the city of Los Angeles, do they have to be registered with us?
No, this is pickup and drop off in Los Angeles. Yes.
Okay.
The county would look at the ones outside of us and then the other cities.
Okay.
Actually, I think the county handles primarily everything outside of the city of LA.
Okay. And in the streamlining we are doing and the reduction of redundancies that we are doing, are we taking any actions that are irreversible? Like if we find out a year from now that we don't like what we're doing, can we reverse it? And the reason I ask is I know there's some stuff with fire and ambulance stuff that if we turn over jurisdiction to the county, we're not able to get it back. And I just don't remember if this is in that category or not.
No, this isn't in that category. We could bring this back any time and make a change if we feel like this doesn't currently work. So our regulation doesn't necessarily change as it relates to fingerprinting because right now it is permissive. It's a may.
Right.
So it gives us latitude to go back and forth.
Okay, great. All right, so without objection, we will send this forward to council. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
And that brings us to item number 10.
Item number 10 is the DOT report and ordinance relative to status update on the formulation of a multiple provider car share fixed space and point-to-point car share permit program.
No, there's no public comment on this. Nope.
Looks like there's going to be someone to go. I can start.
Okay.
Good afternoon. Marcel Porras, Chief Sustainability Officer at LADOT. Today I'm presenting a report back on the multiple car share permit program and the free-floating car share program. And this was a result of feedback that was heard in November at this committee that directed staff to go back and spend some time providing some additional clarification and working with the industry on some issues that were still kind of sticking points. The first thing that we did was to provide more clarity to the industry and to folks applying for the program, and we bifurcated the two programs into their own draft rules and regulations for consideration of this committee. Also, we worked to provide a more apples-to-apples comparison in terms of the fees of the program. And so we did a survey of cities across the country. And as an attachment, we have kind of those different fees set up, but we, in an attempt to do the apples-to-apples comparison, we tried to normalize and pick a average meter recovery rate and combined it with the fees that we're asking for and how that compared to other cities. Based on that analysis, we're able to report back that on average, the city of Los Angeles for a year, the total annual cost per space would be approximately $2,500, $2,550. That would include an annual permit fee, meter recovery fee, and also a one-time implementation fee. And looking at some of the other cities that we compared, we looked at Baltimore, Boston, Chicago, Oakland, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. And in that analysis, it demonstrated that while we weren't the most expensive, we weren't the cheapest either. As part of that exercise as well, we continued to strive to look and see how we could reduce costs. One of the ways we were able to achieve that was by transferring, by doing what was absolutely required of us. So in looking at parking meter conversions, the City of LADOT specifically has the jurisdiction over parking meters and the removals of that. So that is a fee that we held on, which is $200 a meter fee. But all other fees we transferred over to the operator and are allowing them the ability to fabricate their own signs, install their own signs, and we believe that this is an opportunity for them to expedite the installation of that. Our engineers would review the final designs, but that fee we've also waived due to the fact that it is a pilot. So that's on the fee schedule. There were a couple questions too in terms of like the impact of free floating specifically on preferential parking districts. We took the opportunity to review the processes that exist in place to make sure that we're not having that we're not overly burdening preferential parking districts. This also went hand in hand with our having conversations with council offices that did actually have PPDs and what their feelings were about that. So I think first and foremost, it's important to remember or to note that the qualified car sharing operators do track their vehicles and have real-time information on their vehicles. And so at any time we would be able to work with them and understand specifically what is the duration of stay for these vehicles in preferential parking districts. The assumption is also that the reason that those vehicles are parked there is because those are residents or adjacent shoppers to that area that are using that vehicle, and that vehicle would be used again to leave that area as well. So that's kind of the first pass at the rebalancing and understanding kind of what the utilization is. The other piece that we have in the draft rules and guidelines is requiring that the operators be responsive to customer complaints and responsive to moving a vehicle within 24 hours of a customer complaint. LADOT also reserves the right to access those complaint logs as well from the operators. And finally, and this is kind of the big stick that we would reserve the right to do, is to require, should we find non-compliance or an impact to a preferential parking district, then we have the ability to require the operators to geofence or to actually restrict the driver to actually end a trip within the PPD area. And that technology we will be also, as part of the operations, we'll be applying that technology to, as we mentioned previously, like peak hour, tow lanes, et cetera. So there was also a question regarding how do we actually make sure that we're not having an over-concentration of these vehicles in an area. And so what we've set out and established is that we will actually not allow for more than 2 spaces per block, and then that includes both block faces per application. So that is one way that we look at restricting.
That was one of the questions, but attached to that was also how are you going to enforce that?
So that's a good point. So I think the distinction between free floating and point to point. So when I'm referring about the over concentration of the actual reserved spaces, right, the way we control that is by only allowing. So we have to process the permits and go out and clear the location and work with them to actually, and the council office to identify the space. And so through that control of that space, that's how we control whether or not, where they go. So that's one pass. On the free floating perspective, we don't have any restrictions if for, in some instances, let's just take, for example, the Women's March. There may be an opportunity where people are actually using the free floating to get to a big event and a special event. Or we anticipate those vehicles being driven to locations where there are activities that people want to attend, either events or either it's work. And so there are no restrictions on actually those vehicles being dropped off in any specific area to that extent. Did that answer your question on that?
It does. I just don't think we have a real sense as to how we're going to enforce either one of those pieces, but we can get into it later. We really don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's an honest conversation that we need to be sincere about.
Okay. I think also there was a question about should we be putting a maximum on the number of permits? And again, I think part of it is going to be dictated by staff capacity. And so we have a limit on the number of applications that we can actually receive. But as a pilot and in the interest of increasing more shared mobility options, we actually are not in favor of putting a maximum at this time, but something that we evaluate and report back to this committee. The other piece is how do we establish a procedure for an unexpected change of parking regulation in special events? And so in this instance, the city currently maintains a website that lists all of the temporary tow areas and special events and provides notice of when those closures and those restrictions are going to happen. Currently, we don't have the technical capacity to push out that information, and I think that might be a opportunity in the future. But for right now, there is a website that can be referenced to anticipate where those street closures are happening, and we would put the responsibility on the operators to continue to check that website. It's my understanding that there's a permitting process, and so there's actually notification even before the 48 hours that these closures are being considered and applied for. In terms of looking at data and data reporting, we looked at kind of what some of the other cities are doing. We also worked with the industry to take some of their comments and include those into the new draft rules and guidelines. We do think it is, as we continue to improve our understanding of data, we think that this is going to be an evolving process. Going to how we enforce, how we understand kind of what the value is of, and the mobility opportunities are. This is something that will continue, and we're continuing to engage, not just for the sake of car sharing, but as we look at taxis, as we look at bike share as well. And I think another one, one of the questions that was brought up is, what is the permitting process like in the coastal zone? And is that process conducive for allowing car sharing spaces to be allocated within a reasonable time frame? Given that this pilot is a year, we wanted to make sure that we're responsive. So we did a little bit of work there. We spoke to Bureau of Engineering, which is the lead agency in the city for any permits applied for in the coastal zone, and we had conversations with Coastal Commission staff as well to understand that. I think one specific question that was asked was, is there a waiver, is there a blanket permit for all, that we just say, hey, we're going to allow car sharing to happen. The city will, as long as the city does its due diligence, is that an option? The answer to that is no. So one approach could be to actually work up front with the car share operators to identify what are all of the spaces that are going to be pursued and actually apply to that as a batch. If that's so-called desire and we come to agreement on that, or it could be on a one-off or two-off basis, depending on the interest that comes from the car sharing industry on that.
On that, I'd suggest that you may want to do sort of a master zone-wide application to the Coastal Commission, so you don't have to go for each space. And maybe what you do with the Coastal Commission is, and there'll be public hearings at the local level in the coastal zone about this first, but maybe the Coastal Commission says, yeah, you can do 20 spots in the coastal zone,
No, definitely, and again, I think it's going to evolve from some of those conversations with the car share operators themselves, with the local council offices. In the example of bike sharing in Venice, we did a package of car share or bike share locations where we presented 15 locations for the west side, some of which weren't utilized, some of which were. So that could be a similar approach that we employ.
Cities do it. Santa Monica, Manhattan Beach.
A lot of the other jurisdictions don't have to go to the Coastal Commission for as much as we do. We have
Not
to
even
fit.
Santa Monica?
No, Santa Monica doesn't go to coastal as often because, as my understanding is, they have a completed local coastal program. We are going to get it done on my watch, but we've been waiting since the 1970s in Los Angeles to do one. So,
It's about time, Mr. Vaughn.
yes, it is.
Get it done.
And I think to wrap up, I think one of the things that we continue to be interested in and that we've had preliminary conversations about is the issue of equity. One of the recommendations in a previous report was to allow for the revenue that's recovered from this program, both in fees and in parking meter recovery, to be at some point accessed for to be utilized to achieve equity goals. We've done some like kind of baseline discussions with other cities, and this is particularly in the new mobility space, car share, bike share. This is still something that is pretty nascent, and folks are looking at how do we actually achieve equitable results in terms of not just geographic equity, but actually equity in terms of the folks who are using this. Again, this program would depend on the revenues from that program. What we're asking for is that we give the opportunity to let the pilot run for a little bit, collect some fees, and then come back with the future presentation to this committee on what works and what we think. And I think that part of that will have to be done in concert with the industry as well to understand what the friction points in their processes is for both geographic equity and for equity across the utilization of the population.
I have a question about this part. So what type of benchmarks or reporting requirements or deadlines are we planning to put on the pilot operators to ensure that we're making efforts to implement an equity program? Is there anything we can put on the table now?
Well, I think it's...
Can we at least get them, can we request that a quarterly updates be introduced to make sure that they're moving in this direction?
So we're, in terms of data requirements, we're asking them to report every 30 days or monthly on a baseline set of data of information so that we understand how the program's operating. And then there's also a survey, a customer survey that we're requiring, an annual customer survey. We also, at the same time, are looking at getting some learnings from the electric vehicle car share program that we have. Through our engagement in that pilot program, we are working closely with a steering committee of nonprofits, including Trust South LA, Korean Immigrant Workers Association, and SALEF, Salvadorian American Leadership Education Fund. And then there's also a lot of statewide attention on that, and we have check-ins and a part of a working group with the Greenlining Institute out of the Bay Area, who is funding and supporting the California Air Resources Board funding towards disadvantaged communities. And so again, that EV car share pilot that we're doing is a focus on disadvantaged communities. And
do they have data? Do they have benchmarks or recommendations?
No.
Or anything to help us?
No,
in writing to make sure that they're meeting their
for that
minimum requirements?
Well, why don't we?
We need to give direction here.
Yeah, I get your point that we need to get some data, see what's working, see what the fees and how it shakes out in the pilot. That's the point of the pilot, and then we can put more requirements in based on the data we have. But why not require them before operating during the pilot, where we know things will change and things will shake out, to submit an equity plan, and they have to report on that during the course of the pilot. So we know that they're committed to day one to making a good faith effort. And then that will give us another data point from which to be able to craft some requirements.
And so I just want to make sure that there's a sincere effort on behalf of the operator to make sure that we are making efforts to bring in a cross section of users. I mean, just looking at your geographical area that they're targeting, I can already see it's so much easier to focus on your high-end users rather than low-income communities. So let's provide that benchmark so that we're not back here arguing why that didn't happen. Let's get it done. That's part of the requirements of doing business in the city of LA.
Great.
And if they can't meet those requirements,
Right.
I'll be thinking twice about this
Yeah.
program.
Okay.
Anything else?
Nope.
I did have one more question.
Yeah, go for it.
So what are other cities doing in terms of, do they have any emissions requirements to their car share programs? And the reason I ask this is because if this program is being introduced to try to reduce the number of vehicles owned and on the road, shouldn't we also be looking at how to reduce emission impacts across the city?
So I would ask one of my analysts to come up who's done some of the work on the emission stuff. But I think broadly, car sharing already, through studies that have come out of Berkeley by Professor Susan Shaheen, have demonstrated that for every one car share out there, it removes 7 vehicles. And so that's already an emission savings from just the car sharing program itself.
So what city in specific are you referring to in the studies out of Berkeley? Is there specific data
Yeah.
that shows that? What city, for example? San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley? Who's got that information?
We've listed it in, I think it's, I'd have to get that. San Diego, Vancouver, they looked at specifically where Car2Go works. It was something that was listed in the report that came in, I think, in May, but I can pull up that information and share that with you. In terms of the emission standards for vehicles, I think as a city, we are moving towards zero to low emission vehicles, even as you look at our policies around taxi fleet, in the EV car share pilot, what we're doing with converting our transit buses. And so I think there definitely is an interest, and that's why we've made the recommendation on the 30 mile per gallon fuel efficiency requirements across the fleet. And so we are considering that, and I think that is, one of the things that we'll continue to measure as the project evolves.
And there's some elements of the industry that are annoyed at the 30 mile per gallon requirement.
That are annoyed?
Yeah, they think it's too strict.
Yeah.
But I would imagine that, I certainly wouldn't lower it below that at all, but I would imagine that over the course of time, we're going to progressively increase the standards on this over the years.
Right. I think it might be helpful to just talk about CAFE a little bit.
Okay. Currently, the corporate average fuel economy standard runs from about 29 to 33 for the recent 3 model years. And also in the future, I think California the goal is to raise the bar up to 54.5 mpg by 2025. So we are geared to eventually up the MPG for the program as well for the fleet. But right now, I believe based on the recent 5 years data, that the standard that we are that the CAFE set, then the 30 miles per gallon is reasonable, and it's pretty much the average.
And how often will we be looking at increasing the MPG? So currently it's 30, and within 5 years, would we revisit this, or?
In the draft rules and guidelines, we also have that the vehicles will be transitioned out either at 3 years of utilization or 45,000 miles of usage as well. And so I think what we could spend time working on is, through the pilot, how do we continue to adjust? And one of the things that we're going to need to hear from the industry as well is, once this program is approved, determining who actually can abide and is willing to abide by that. I think that's going to be an indicator as well. We may think that everything is perfect and move forward and we adopt it, but at the end of the day, what's really going to prove it to us is if there's actually people pulling permits and wanting to come and bring car sharing.
Well, this is a pilot. What's the duration?
1 year.
1 year. So at the end of 1 year, we have the opportunity to raise the standards if we want. I mean, I think we probably want to be progressively raising them, and what we may want to do at the end of the pilot is come up with a graduated schedule that changes over the years, just as we're trying to do it with getting off coal at DWP or anything else, where we look at what the standard is at the benchmark of 2025, get to 50, whatever, and step it up over the course of the next 5-10 years after that.
Okay, so we're going to revisit the emissions issue in about a year.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we have one speaker card from Walter Rosencrantz. Yeah, I'm going to tweak it a little bit to add this.
I'm sorry, I was corrected. The pilot is actually a 2-year term. So just to clarify, the pilot is a 2-year term. So just to clarify on that.
All right, well, there'll be a 1-year report back.
Hi, good afternoon. Excuse me. Walter Rosencrantz with the car share company Car2Go. First off, I just want to thank council and staff for all the hard work they put into this. I know a lot of time has gone into this. And we appreciate all the work that they've done regarding the RPZ access. We understand that's a sensitive issue, so we appreciate the council committee entertaining that and for staff making a recommendation. I will commit, it's in our interest also to make sure that those communities are well served. So we've always worked in the cities that we're in that have those zones to make sure that we address any issues that may come up. And also large events were brought up. And this is something where we have a lot of experience. For example, we're operating in the city of Austin, and you have ACL and then also, or Austin City Limits, I'm sorry, and South by Southwest, 2 giant events. And, oh my
Finish your
gosh.
thought.
Okay. And we work actually with the city to create drop zones and that to really improve the traffic flow and getting the vehicles out. So we have experience with that. That being said, there's a couple of items that were brought up that would make us not eligible to qualify for this permit.
You've got to wrap it up quick because you're way over time.
Okay. On the emissions requirements, we fully understand and we get where this is coming from. Over the last couple of years, the makeup of our fleet has changed. We are a wholly owned sub of Daimler, so the vehicles that we use are the Mercedes badge vehicles, and unfortunately we're about 2 miles per gallon short of the requirement. So that would disqualify from us being able to participate. And also, we understand there's some insurance language that is still sort of in flux that we haven't seen. If the measure passes as is, it's just to notify the city that we wouldn't be able to participate under the current conditions. Like I say, we thank the staff and all the work that's been done and gone into this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marcel, could you come back? I appreciate the testimony. I was actually, before you came up, I was thinking, 30's too low, and I was inclined to actually change the recommendation to go higher because I get what you're saying. We have aggressive sustainability standards here in Los Angeles, and I think at the end of the 1 year, we're going to want to go higher. I mean, this is within the CAFE standard zone, but we probably want to be ultimately higher than that if we're going to get to where we want to be by 2025. Wanted to ask your response or the department's recommendations on the insurance issue he raised.
Sure. Walter is right. We've been doing some back and forth on the insurance requirements. The one point of contention that we've heard from the industry was the general automobile liability coverage. And so the original proposal was $1 million kind of blanket per occurrence. And I think after having some conversations, we believe that we can support a reduction. So our recommendation would be to reduce that to a split liability coverage. So it would be $100,000 per body, $300,000 for per incidents, and $100,000 per property.
Okay.
And so that's where our risk management, that's where we feel comfortable as a department making that recommendation. I think it's to be decided whether or not that's something that the industry would be able to.
That's a fairly standard policy breakdown, higher than the state requirement, which should be higher anyway. But that's a pretty industry standard. Okay. All right, so I can't give separate speaking standards for different folks. I appreciate it. So unless there's a question that you want to ask of someone. Okay. So my recommendation would be that we approve the department's recommendations 1 through 3 as is. Approve 4 with a slight wordsmithing to make it clear that we're requesting the city attorney prepare and present the ordinance as opposed to DOT preparing and presenting the ordinance. I'm sure Mr. Nagel would appreciate any draft you can provide, but
at all. But your city attorney should be,
yeah.
My mom always wanted me to go to law school, so.
Thank you. Or failure. Yeah.
I'd be comfortable with more ordinances coming under Ms. Reynolds' signature, so it works for me. On the 5th recommendation it reads currently is to direct DOT to report 180 days. I'll say 180 and 365 days with an update on the pilot car share program. And I'll leave that as it is. It's going to be slightly different than what I've written down. Then an additional item 6 would be to direct DOT to conduct community outreach and lead a one-time application for a coastal development permit for up to 20 fixed car share spaces in the coastal zone. And item 7 would be to direct DOT to modify operator insurance requirements for comprehensive automobile liability to establish the DOT recommended minimum limits of 100, 300, 100. And direct LADOT to report back in item 8 on the technology and or process improvements needed to provide automatic notifications to operators of upcoming temporary parking restrictions that impact car share vehicle locations. And then 9 would be to require all participants to submit an equity plan with benchmarks and status reports throughout the period of the program, and to ask DOT to report back at 180 days on recommendations for a city equity program based on the initial data, the available funding, and input from the community and industry stakeholders. Does that work? Okay.
Mr. Chair, will this be building off the January 24th DOT report for the first 3? Because there's 2 reports that are on file.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so that'll be the recommendation of the committee without objection. Thank you. And that concludes this item, and that concludes this meeting. Thank you very much.